These days, it can seem like scientists and researchers are making mind-blowing discoveries each and every minute. From the outer reaches of space to our long-forgotten past, we are only starting to scratch the surface of what we can potentially uncover. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at these recent discoveries. Deadman's Island. Located near the Isle of Sheppey in Kent, England, lies an inconspicuous stretch of muddy swampland known to locals and journalists alike as Deadman's Island. You cannot visit without authorised permission, and the island has been closed to the public, uninhabited for over 150 years. When you are given permission to visit the island, you're immediately greeted by a sight picked straight out of a horror movie. Nicknamed Coffin Bay, hundreds of open coffins covered with scattered remains welcome you with a macabre boldness hitherto unseen. Over countless decades and generations that have sprung forth since, the barren mudbank has, with its moss-covered rocks and hidden cracks and caves perfect for hiding in, inspired endless tales of ghoulish spirits and rabid dogs roaming the island looking to ward off potential invaders. Some have claimed that the island is solely occupied by the deceased, which isn't surprising. It's fair to say that no one has ventured anywhere near the island since, with journalists only recently making the trip over, not out of choice, but out of necessity. The world needs to know about the tragic events that happened there. In fact, the terrible truth behind the island stems back to the conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars in 1814. Several naval ships, including the HMS Ganymede, were commandeered and converted into a floating prison, with steel bars, cells to hold hundreds of convicts, and squalid conditions. Conditions so bad that they became a filthy breeding ground for fatal diseases, with outbreaks of cholera widespread and uncontrollable. Alongside multiple diseases to deal with, the inmates were also subjected to poor food and drink rations, leaving 1 in 4 people to pass away out of 400. Because the passengers were inmates and therefore seen as subhuman by the guards, they were denied a formal burial. To prevent the cholera outbreaks from getting out of hand even more, the authorities had no choice but to dispose of the bodies of those contaminated on the closest bit of land they could find. This ad hoc disposal site just so happened to be the Medway Mudflats, which would, as a result, later become known as Deadman's Island. It is believed by many researchers, scholars, and journalists that the burials took place throughout the 1800s. Daft Charman, a historian and researcher who studied the island and wrote a book on it, claims burials were still happening there in 1845, with bodies originally buried in wooden coffins placed in unmarked graves under 6 foot of mud in isolated locations across the Medway. In 2016, the remains of over 200 of the inmates' bodies were found. Scholars believe that they were only discovered because of the tides of the Medway rising, washing the remains out to sea and redepositing body parts along the bay of the island. Though some argue that the bodies should be reburied in proper burial sites, the sea is unrelenting and it's doubtful this will happen. Most of the lost souls abandoned there, along with Deadman's Island itself, will all succumb to the overwhelming ocean eventually. Nazino Island. Tomsk, Russia, home to a yearly pilgrimage made by locals between the city and Nazinsky Island as a heartfelt gesture of remembrance and sorrow for the victims of the horrific, inhumane events that occurred there during the summer of 1933. A social experiment created by Joseph Stalin and the local Soviet authorities that worked under him. Almost 90 years ago, a small group of barges that were intended to be used to transport lumber were filled with thousands of urban déclassé prisoners, approximately 6,000 in total, and taken to Nazinsky Island. It's widely understood that these men and women were brought there to be used as settlers, with orders to construct a special settlement to add to Stalin's Gulag, the network of labor camps spread across the Soviet Union. This plan was part of a much larger plan to resettle at least 2 million people to Siberia and Kazakhstan, proposed by Genrikh Yagoda, the head of the OGPU secret police, and Matvey Berman, head of the Gulag system at the time. The plan was to bring 1 million hectares of virgin land into production and to become a self-sufficient society within just 2 years. Nonetheless, resources were severely limited by the ongoing famine occurring in the Soviet Union. The authorities in Tomsk were unfamiliar with the urban deportee prisoners and expected a great deal from them. As a result, the deportees were sent to the most isolated work sites in a bid to keep them far away. By the time that they arrived on the island on May 18, 1933, many had already died, having quickly fallen victim to starvation, disease, and the brutal elements. This is due to the lack of tools, shelter, and food provided to them by the prisoners' armed guards, who took it upon themselves to only give them a ration of 300 grams of flour per person to mix with water and make a paste. The prisoners were disembarked in such a disorganized and hapless manner that upon arrival, only 322 women and 4,556 men were counted. The bodies of 27 people were found, thought to have died during the trip, and over a third of the remaining settlers were far too weak to even stand. Not content with the disparity in rations and the overwhelming brutality between the settlers, an additional 1,200 deportees were sent to the island on May 27, 1933. What little order there was on the island soon began to break down and devolve into chaos. A mass of fights broke out, and many deportees were hunted by the guards, which ended up in them losing their lives. None of the deportees knew much about agriculture, which made it impossible to make the island properly habitable. With only flour provided, the remaining deportees were forced to eat flour mixed with river water, which led to widespread dysentery. With nothing to eat or drink, groups within the settlers quickly formed, and many lost their lives, either as a result of arguments over food and money, or as a source of food. The bodies in possession of valuable items such as gold tooth fillings were looted often, and lack of proper food and the rising death count led to widespread cannibalism across the island by late May. The dire situation was finally ended by Soviet authorities in early June. The settlements were dissolved, and the surviving 2,856 deportees were transferred to other, smaller settlements upstream. In the 13 weeks since the plan was first put into motion, around 2,000 people died due to starvation, exposure, disease, someone else killing them, or accidental loss of life. A further 2,000 had disappeared and were also presumed to have died. The gruesome events that took place across Nazino Island were left virtually unknown until 1988, during the Glasnost reforms, when an investigation by human rights group Memorial first made details of the affair available to the general public. However, the event did not become popularized until 14 years later, when, in 2002, reports of the Special Commission Communist Party of Western Siberia were finally published by Memorial. Eagle's Nest Sinkhole. Take a 2-hour drive west of Orlando, Florida, beyond the mouse hats and dolphin shows, and you'll find yourself at a large clearing in a pine-filled forest. Standing at the foot of a large pond, it doesn't seem like anything particularly special, just unimpressive and scummy looking. But appearances can be deceiving. The pond itself sits over a vast underwater cave, the Eagle's Nest Sinkhole, well known for the outstanding beauty hidden below its surface. Famous amongst divers, many come to dive in its vast network of underwater caves that are considered to be some of the most beautiful in the world. The journey begins down a narrow vertical tunnel, quickly opening up into a submerged space the size of an aircraft hangar. The walls are smoothed out and shaped by hundreds of years of erosion, with side caves peeling off from the sides and painted in the slate greys, cream whites and pale blues of changing rock layers. It is an eye-opening display of natural beauty. The mouth of the cave, however, shows something far less appealing. A white sign driven into the rock bed, rusty nails holding it together, and the Grim Reaper standing over the bodies of divers who have been met with a terrible fate. The sign's message is far from ambiguous. "Stop," it says. "Prevent your death. Go no farther. There's nothing in this cave worth dying for. Do not go beyond this point." This reveals the Eagle's Nest's deadly past, and is both a stark reminder and a warning to divers attempting to challenge one of the world's most treacherous underwater caves. This place has claimed the lives of many who attempt to explore its magnificent caverns, and yet history and Grim Reaper sign withstanding, divers continue to do so at their peril. This is not a case of just amateur divers being beyond their ability. The Eagle's Nest takes experienced divers also, and one Sunday in October 2016, 2 seasoned divers befell the cave's macabre past. Patrick Peacock and Chris Rittenmeyer were there with a third friend, Justin Blakely, who was not as experienced as the others. That being the case, he stayed close to the cave's entrance, but did not journey further in. This decision would save his life. When Patrick and Chris failed to return to the pre-agreed meeting point, Justin called the emergency services. Rescue divers began their search, but it was soon clear that rather than a rescue mission, this would be a recovery. Patrick and Chris's bodies would not be found until the next day. Their bodies were not far from each other, trapped at a depth of 260 feet. It is unclear what exactly happened. Maybe it was just malfunctioning equipment, impaired visibility, or what some divers refer to as the rapture of the deep, succumbing to a deadly amount of nitrogen entering the bloodstream that rapidly disorients. Perhaps the most tragic incident occurred 3 years prior, when the fateful depths of Eagle's Nest struck the heart of a family one Christmas. Scuba enthusiast Darren Spivey and his son, 15-year-old Dylan, were looking to test their Christmas presents, brand new air tanks, and saw the Eagle's Nest as the ideal location. This would be their last Christmas. Dylan was found lifeless at 67 feet, whilst his father was recovered on the cave floor at 127 feet. It was thought that Dylan ran through his air tank too quickly, and whilst his father was able to share the remainder of his main supply, could not reach the spare tank in time. These are just 2 stories amongst many of the lives lost at this dangerous place, and yet the Eagle's Nest still remains open today. Go back to the sign at the entrance of the cave and look closer at the Grim Reaper. He's not stopping you from entering at all, but with a raised finger beckoning you in. Do you dare to take him on? But what do you make of these recent findings? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us by growing this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.